Tell me.
Is this online?
Yes, we have a
Live?
yes, live streaming.
Wow.
Are we just taking turns? Right, so it's like all hands and then after.
But it's like no one is doing online, so it's completely.
Ah, yes.
She sort of said, we had that children. Oh, more interesting. Do you want to do this live? This is the live conference.
May I have your attention? We will start in another 5 minutes, just waiting for a few students to come in. The people sitting at the back, please feel free to move up in front in case you feel it's more comfortable. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, can I have your attention, please? I'm going to start now. Greetings, everybody. Professor Peter Mattison, Dr. Christina Mattison, Dr. Chow and his team. My name is Sagantha Gaurishankar, and I welcome you all to the third HKU Global Student Forum. A brief introduction about myself. I'm a final year student, double majoring in economics and global studies, and I'm the director of the forum and moderator for this evening. So the first of its kind in HKU, the Global Student Forum, was jointly initiated by the HKU Student Consulting Group and the General Education Unit in 2014. With a common vision to promote student discussion, the forum aims to come to a conclusion of today's topic of addressing gender inequality through active discussions led by students and the suggestions of our speakers. I would like to very briefly introduce our speakers for this evening. Since the accolades itself will take the first hour of the forum, we have instead provided their detailed profiles on the handouts given to you. Please have a look. Our first speaker is Professor Peter Mattison, the 15th President and Vice Chancellor of the University of Hong Kong. Please give a round of applause for him. He will give us some insights on his own experiences in the UK, and then edify us on the reasons for spearheading HKU into the He for She campaign. He will then focus on some strategic initiatives taken to address gender inequity. He will also comment on the international dimension of gender equity in universities worldwide. Our second very special guest for this evening is Dr. Yok Chow, Chairperson of the Equal Opportunities Commission, Hong Kong. He graduated from HKU with an MBBS degree in 1971. Could we welcome back Dr. Chow with a round of applause too? He will discuss the progress of gender equality in Hong Kong and how far we have reached in bridging the gap. He will also share his thoughts on what should be further done to advance this important cause, including the importance of engaging men and how each of us can contribute in its further empowerment. Now, I'm going to explain the format of this forum. So the first half will be allocated to our guest speakers, and after a small break of 5 minutes, we have comments from the students, and also hear them present their views on the topic. After which, we will engage in an open house Q&A session. Before I call upon Professor Mattison to take over the mic, I would like to show you a small clip of the launch of HKU's commitment for He for She.
Welcome to the family of He for She. Come with us on a journey to achieve a world that is aimed for gender equality by 2030. Being a He for She means we are going to be a change maker at an individual and at an institutional level.
Colleagues, students, alumni, friends and guests, my overwhelming emotion standing here is to actually say thank you to Elizabeth and her colleagues at the United Nations for giving me the opportunity to be part of something which I think is exciting, timely, important, interesting and empowering, both for me personally, for the University of Hong Kong, and I hope for Hong Kong more widely. And as you have heard, to be rather proud of the fact that the University of Hong Kong is the first university in the world to launch on campus its commitment to the initiative. And I'm going to keep on saying that because I like being the first in the world to do anything.
I want to tell you that we are very proud of Hong Kong Youth's commitment to the He for She initiative. And I would also like to see Hong Kong Youth champion putting gender mainstreaming into action.
Dr. Easton conducts research on women academics, and she's recently conducted a gendered mapping exercise of the higher education sector in Hong Kong. I think Dr. Easton's data provide us with very striking evidence of the challenges that face us in the Hong Kong higher education sector.
I found it very, very difficult to find something new to say about gender equality because it's obvious, isn't it?
Gender equality is a human right. not only women's rights.
We need to make these changes, and men have to stand side by side in solidarity with women. This is what is at the heart of the He for She campaign. It makes this university and others that will participate a place where students learn to stand together for gender equality.
I want to leave you with words of somebody, a woman in this case, who has inspired me. The one and only Eleanor Roosevelt, who once famously said, "When it's better for everyone, it's better for everyone." He for She is about making things better for everyone. So please, let's make it better for everyone. Thank you.
What kind of practical things are you doing to narrow the gender inequality gap?
On the ground level, we work with government officials, we work with universities, we work with corporations in implementing policies targeted for women and girls. What's also interesting, I think, in the He for She movement is that beyond what we are doing as young women, we are starting to see some very remarkable impact stories coming from the ground.
I was wondering what UN Women wants to do in places like this where there seems to be equality already.
We firmly believe that equality can only be achieved when both men and women are working equally. Right now, the women are at the table. Right now, we need to bring more men to the table. And this is why He for She exists.
We feel that He for She is not just about men or about women, it's about everybody. It's about bringing out everybody's potential and not being dragged down by traditional gender stereotypes and biases. So it calls on everyone to listen to those who are silenced, encourage those who are shamed, and empower those who are not privileged.
Everyone, regardless of gender, has a stake in gender equality and inclusivity. It's time to plant that seed. It's time for us, students, and everyone else to act.
Let's try and make a difference. Let's make He for She more than just words. As Emma Watson said, let's turn it into actions. Let's have the genders work together, not in opposition. And let's really try and do something about it. So thank you for coming. Let's go for it. He for She.
Okay. Now could I please request Burhan from the HKU Student Consulting Group to escort Mr. Mattison up on stage.
Thank you. I'll stand over here just because I have some notes which I want to refer to. So, thank you very much. It was nice to see that again. That's 5 months ago, and it's good for me to get an opportunity to update you and myself and York, who was also there on that day, and on some of the thinking that's gone on around He for She since then. And how we are trying to do what I said at the end, which is trying to turn words into actions, because I think that's critical. So it's great to have the opportunity to talk to the student forum. I'm very keen to get some information from you, so I want it to be a two-way conversation. And in fact, I have a couple of specific questions that I'd like to pose to the audience that I hope we can come back to maybe in the discussion phase. The United Nations Women Mission, so you heard from Pumzile Malambo Unguka, who's the Director General, and you heard from Elizabeth Nyamiyara, who's her assistant. Their mission is to change the world. And that's the way they talk about it. My mission is not quite so lofty. My ambition is to try and change universities, particularly this one. If that has an impact in the wider world, then so be it, as far as I'm concerned. But my primary job is to run the University of Hong Kong, and I think if I can achieve change here, and maybe in universities more widely in Hong Kong and elsewhere in the world, then that to me would be quite an achievement, and I don't tend to think in world terms, but that's because I'm not the United Nations. So the remarks I wanted to make to you this evening, I'm going to say something about he for she, and then I'm going to, as Suganda said, I'm going to talk about some of my experience in the UK because I think it's relevant and it explains to you a little bit about me and a bit about why I wanted to get involved in he for she. Then I'm going to talk about Hong Kong. I'm going to briefly mention the Philippines, and I'm going to briefly mention Uganda. So 4 different geographical locations, if you like, that I'll try and touch on. My wife and I, Tina and I, have just come back from the World Economic Forum in Dalian. So this is what's called Summer Davos. You'll have heard of a meeting called Davos, which takes place in Davos in Switzerland in the winter months. And this was Summer Davos, and it's basically a gathering of economic, industrial, technical experts from around the world. And universities are invited sometimes to these meetings, and I was invited to this one. And there was a session on gender equity. And I made 2 very interesting observations at that session. One was that the audience, the attendees, were predominantly female. And that's something that I've experienced at just about every meeting I've ever been to on gender equity, including our launch event. I'm just sort of trying to have a look around the room here. I would say it's female predominant, the audience here, although I'm very pleased that it's not female only. I was thinking about this today, and actually I had an idea. I don't often have ideas, so I had an idea. And my idea was that if you're going to go to a public meeting on gender issues, try and take someone with you of the opposite gender. And if everybody did that, the audience would be gender balanced. Think about it, it works. Bring somebody with you of a different gender, and that would achieve gender balance of the audience. And it's actually quite an interesting thought process, because that's one way of involving the other genders in the question. So I've done my bit, I brought my wife with me, so she's of the opposite gender, so I've contributed to that idea. The other interesting observation at the World Economic Forum in Dalian in the gender session was that I was really struck by the fact that the other sectors, the people from industry, the people from governments, the people from economic powerhouses, NGOs, charities, they expected the 3 people that were in that session from universities, one of which was me, they expected us to have the answers. They thought we were going to tell them what the answer is to achieving gender equity. They came to thinking that the universities would be able to tell them the answers, and I think they were a bit surprised when I said, I haven't come here to tell you the answers, I've come to try and learn from you, not to teach. I don't think universities have got the answers, and I think it's embarrassing in a way that we don't. And I think it's embarrassing that some of the issues of gender equity are not better solved in universities, including this one, because it's just very interesting to me that a very high-powered, influential and powerful group of people getting together to discuss a topic were under the impression that somehow the universities would have solved the problems and could be able to communicate them, and frankly we haven't. So I'm not going to repeat all the information about he for she, because many of you I hope will have come to the launch and it's publicly available, the information, but just one comment which I asked the UN Women at the time of my invitation to join, and I think is relevant today. And this was, why do they want to focus on universities? You know, they've created this impact group, it's called 10 by 10 by 10, and it's 10 heads of state, of which at the moment only 8 have been announced. 10 CEOs of, chief executive officers of global corporations, global businesses, all 10 of those have been announced. And 10 university presidents, all 10 of which have now been announced, and which I'm one of them. And the question is why, you can understand why they want heads of state, they want to change the world. You can understand why they want CEOs of global corporations, because these people have power and influence and they're geographically spread across the world. But why do they want university presidents? And the answer I got was basically twofold. Firstly, that more than 50% of the world's population is under the age of 30. So a lot of those people will be in universities, and if you want to influence half the world's population, doing it in universities is a pretty good place to start. And then the other reason was that universities are very likely to contain the vast majority of future leaders. And that applies to all sectors of society. And I know that it applies to the University of Hong Kong. York Chow is a leader in Hong Kong. He's a graduate of this university. This university has produced many leaders in Hong Kong and elsewhere in the world. So it's likely that if you talk to a university audience, you are addressing future leaders. And if you want people to change things, then one way of achieving that is to get the future leaders to believe that this change is necessary. So those were their reasons for focusing on universities. What's been happening in the 5 months since we launched? I've been involved in some very interesting conversations in that time, and I've got 3 notes of conversations which I think are interesting. One was with the representative of the University of Witwatersrand, WITS as it's known, in Johannesburg in South Africa. And very interesting issues raised by that university. And I could talk about it for hours because, as many of you know, I'm interested in Africa, and I will mention something about Uganda in a minute. But South Africa is undergoing a process of transformation. And the point that I realised in this conversation with South Africa that I hadn't realised before is that the issues for them are not all about gender. They have a thing called the dual transformation agenda. This means race and gender. So, for example, white women are overrepresented in universities in South Africa compared to black women. So if you do something that promotes the interests of white women, you'll make that imbalance worse. They've also got to address the complicated interdigitation with race. And for South Africa, actually the issues around race are probably at least as important as the issues around gender. So that was sobering to me. You know, I think I've got some difficult challenges to face in relation to gender equity at the University of Hong Kong, but it's nothing like as complicated as the University of Wits in South Africa. So that made me think a little bit. Stony Brook University in New York is another one of the universities where the president is an impact champion. And one of the conversations with them was very interesting. They pointed out a statistic, which is that at the time of matriculation, so in other words, when students sign on in the university, males dominate females in numbers. There are more males than females at Stony Brook University at matriculation. 4 years later, at graduation, there are more females than males. Now, it's not because they've all had sex changes during the studies. It's because you'll know that in the United States, completion is a major issue in universities. In Hong Kong U, completion is almost 100%. Virtually everybody that starts here will graduate. So for those of you that haven't yet graduated, it's good news, you're probably going to. Completion rates are very high. We have very low dropout rates. But in the United States, completion rates are not 100%, and dropout is a big problem. And it's sometimes financial, it's sometimes personal, there are all sorts of reasons why people drop out, but all American universities worry about completion rates. And Stony Brook have just made this observation that although there are more male students at matriculation, there are more female students at graduation. So something about the gender balance that's going on at Stony Brook I think is very interesting. Female students are more likely to complete their studies. Stony Brook take that as a sign that they're doing something right in relation to their student population, but it's a complicated question and I don't know the answer. And then the third conversation I just wanted to comment on was one that I got involved with at the British Council in Hong Kong when one of the visitors was a woman called Nicola Sturgeon. So Nicola Sturgeon is the First Minister of Scotland. She was recently elected, or she was elected last year as the First Minister of Scotland. And many of you probably won't be very interested in UK politics, but I am because I used to be there and I still have a vote. And in the general election that just happened in the UK earlier this year, in May, the Scottish National Party, which is the party that she's head of, did extraordinarily well. So Scotland, the politics of Scotland has been radically transformed. And one of the ways in which it has been transformed by Nicola Sturgeon is on gender. So more than half of her cabinet in Scotland are female. And she's made gender equity in Scotland a major priority for her government. And that's very interesting, and she's making progress. But I thought she was a very good person to ask for some of her opinions. And she said a couple of things which I think are very memorable. She said, we will know that we have gender equity when there are a lot of undistinguished women in positions of power. Now again, just think about that. What she's effectively saying is that there are currently a lot of undistinguished men in positions of power. And the only women that are in positions of power are remarkable women that have managed to make it against the odds. And she was basically saying that equity will come when you don't have to be somehow extraordinary in order to make it, when you can make it if you're average or not extraordinary. The other thing I talked to her about was the issue of a meritocracy. So and I'm going to mention something about this in a minute, I want to improve the gender equity situation at the leadership levels in Hong Kong U, and preferably in the other universities in Hong Kong. In order to do so, we have to appoint a lot of women. So how do we do it? Do we do it by somehow favouring women? Do we do it by all women shortlists? How do we achieve the promotion of more women than there are currently in leadership positions in universities? And this brings up the question of meritocracy. We all believe in meritocracy. I think women generally all want to be appointed to jobs because they deserve to be appointed, not because they're women. And the whole concept of positive action or affirmative action or positive discrimination is a very controversial one, a very complicated one. But I asked Nicola Sturgeon, what does she believe in? And again, her answers were interesting. Firstly, she said that she wants to live and work in a meritocracy. And she believes that at the moment she does not. So she says there's nothing meritocratic about the current situation. So rather than using meritocracy as an argument against change, oh, you can't have positive discrimination because it's not meritocratic, she says, she looks at it the other way around. She says this current situation is not meritocratic, so don't come to me talking about meritocracy when the current situation is not meritocratic. And I thought that was an interesting way of looking at it. And then the other question I asked her was about all-female shortlists, because she wants to have more female MPs in Scotland, Scottish MPs in the Scottish Parliament. And I said to her, are you going to have all-female shortlists? And the answer was yes. So she is promoting the idea of all-female shortlists. Now, when you're a political party leader, you're not subject to employment law. You can do what you like in these kinds of situations. So if she wants all-female shortlists, she can have them for her party. I'm looking at York, but I imagine if I said I want all-female shortlists for appointments at the University of Hong Kong, I'd probably get into trouble with his Equal Opportunities Commission. But it's an interesting idea. How do we do something about changing the gender balance and changing it quickly? So we have an action group for he for she, which Dr. Albert Chow and Wendy, who's here, are both members of. We've been having some discussions about what we can do. I don't want to go into a great long list of the things that we're doing, but there's quite a lot of activity. I think one very major thing we've done is raise awareness of the issue. I think the very fact that you've chosen it as a topic, and I think the very fact that we have the launch here, and I see posters around the campus which either say he for she, or the most recent one I saw says he for he and she for she, or something like that. I can't remember what it is, but it's an adaptation of the slogan. But we've raised awareness. I get invited to be on a panel with Nicola Sturgeon purely because I've been identified as someone that's started to say something about gender equity. I took an interest in the panel in Dalian because of this interest. So I think awareness has been raised in the university generally, and actually also in a wider forum in the other universities in Hong Kong. So I think that's been an achievement. We're actively looking at nursery or kindergarten, or nursery and kindergarten provision at the University of Hong Kong. Currently we don't have nursery or kindergarten for staff and students. We, I hope, will have sometime soon. We're looking at breastfeeding facilities. The government has joined an initiative with, I think it's with UNESCO, on breastfeeding at work. So workplace breastfeeding as one mechanism to try and help women who've recently had a baby to come back to work. And we don't have very good breastfeeding facilities at the University of Hong Kong at the moment. Chinese U, across the water, has much better breastfeeding facilities for its female staff and students than we do. And so that's something that we need to improve, and we're going to work with Chinese U on doing that. I've funded some more research. You heard Dr. Sarah Aston mentioned in the clip, mentioned by Professor Steve Andrews, and Dr. Aston is doing some more work on gender equity in the universities in Hong Kong to try and understand what the current situation is and what people think can be done about it. And that work's partly funded by a grant from the Leadership Foundation in the UK. It's partly funded by the Research Grants Council in Hong Kong, and it's partly funded by the university from the He for She pot. So that will produce more information. I hope that will be very instructive. We're very interested in student initiatives. We've had a couple of proposals, and we're very interested to encourage more, and that's one thing that I hope will come out of this evening. I'd like your ideas, and I'd like to involve you, and I'd like your energies to try and come up with ideas that we can put under the general banner of He for She. And there is funding available, modest amounts of money, so we're not going to be able to fund new buildings or new posts, but we can certainly fund activities. So if there are things that you'd like to do under the He for She banner, then let us know about it, and our committee will discuss whether we think we can support it. One specific thing is that there's going to be, and we need to announce this, Albert, we haven't announced it formally, but anyway, this will be the first announcement. There's going to be a competition for a piece of student art, and I don't actually know yet exactly what types of art they have in mind, but I can give more information about that when I do. But a major museum in New York, and I'm not allowed to say which museum it is, but you'll know that there are a number of major art museums in New York. One of them has agreed to have an exhibition next year for He for She, for the United Nations, and to include in it a piece of student art from each of the 10 impact universities. So a Hong Kong U student, or group of students, will have an opportunity to exhibit a piece of art in a major museum in New York, and I think that's pretty exciting. So we're going to have a competition. That will be the first prize. There'll be some other prizes, and we're going to encourage Hong Kong U students to, either individually or as groups, to produce pieces of art which might be able to be exhibited in New York. The reason we haven't announced it yet is that we're not, as you can tell, not very clear on exactly what their expectations are. But it could be, I think it could be painting or music or drawing. I think it could be any kind of, generally, how to find a piece of art, but I need to know for sure. So these are some of the things that we're going to carry on working on under He for She at Hong Kong U. Your original question, when Susanna first emailed me about this evening, the original question was something along the lines of, is feminism the appropriate way forward? Now, I am not an expert on feminism, but one question I'd like to pose to the audience, and I hope it comes up in discussion, is the relationship between feminism as traditionally defined and thought about and He for She. There is a school of thought that He for She is misguided, that it's somehow expecting men to suddenly solve the problems. And Elizabeth Nayamayara, who you heard was part of our launch event, is brilliant at answering that question. Her answer is basically that men are part of the problem, and therefore men have got to be part of the solution. And she doesn't accept that this somehow infringes feminist principles. But I'd be very interested to hear people's views on that, because it's something I don't know enough about. Okay, so that's probably about half my time to go. I'll try and quickly do the other things I wanted to say. So I wanted to say something about the UK. I'm, as many of you know, I'm a medical graduate, so in my previous job I was Dean of the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry. Therefore the gender parity issues in medical and dental careers were of great interest to me. In the UK, when anyone makes a remark about the fact that there are not enough women at senior levels in medicine, particularly medicine, the statement is often made that it's just a matter of time. That now, because female medical students outnumber males, that with time, these people will come through the system and eventually become the leaders, and it's just a question of being patient. And the evidence does not support that assertion. So medical student populations in the United Kingdom have been female predominant since the year 1990, so 25 years. There have been more women than men enrolling in medical schools. And yet, despite that, the proportion of women at senior leadership levels remains low. So at consultant level in the National Health Service, it's 25%. So 25% of consultants are female, whereas 50% of students have been female for the last 25 years, and it takes about 17 or 18 years to get to being a consultant. So in that 25 years, if it was just a matter of time, we should have seen change. In some specialties, and general surgery is the worst, I don't know about orthopaedic surgery, York, but I know orthopaedic surgery is pretty male-dominated, certainly, and certainly in the UK. But general surgery in the UK, 8% of the consultants are female. So a tiny proportion. So medicine has a problem with gender equity. And a very influential woman called Sally Davis, Dame Sally Davis, decided that she was going to try and fix some of the issues around gender equity in British medical schools, particularly English medical schools, because her funding agency was responsible mainly for England. And she introduced an initiative that basically said you won't get any funding for research in your medical school unless you have an Athena Swan Silver Award. Athena Swan is an organisation which originally for science subjects, but more recently applied to medicine, looks at gender equity policies. And they give awards, gold, silver and bronze. And she said she would only give any funding from her agency if you had a silver award, at least a silver award. And at that time, no medical school in the UK had any Athena Swan awards. So this was a real challenge to the medical schools. And the medical school that I was dean of, and all the other medical schools in the country had to pay much more attention to equal opportunities than they had done previously, otherwise they wouldn't qualify for funding. And we, in Bristol, we did a number of things. We paid attention to equal opportunities with training events and policies being implemented. We avoided things like unconscious bias. I learned a lot about this phenomenon of unconscious bias, which I'm not going to go into now because many of you will know exactly what I mean, but scheduling meetings at 5 o'clock in the evening or at 8 o'clock in the morning when people with caring responsibilities can't come is an example of unconscious bias, and we tried to address that. We gave conference support for childcare and breastfeeding, etc. We had introduced a return to work scheme so that people could be eased back into work after periods of either part-time working or leave. We introduced study days during maternity leave so that when women were on maternity leave they could still come in during their maternity leave for days working with their research teams or doing some teaching, and we provided childcare where it was necessary. So we did a number of these initiatives, and this made a big difference, and we, to cut a long story short, got Athena Swan Awards in all 3 schools of my faculty. And then because we were successful with that, I then got the job of running equal opportunities for the whole university, because the university then had to get an Athena Swan Award, and we tried to introduce these other policies across all the faculties, not just the science faculties. So that was really my background in gender equity work. Then I arrived at the University of Hong Kong a year and a half ago. During the time before I started, I was here several times and I had several meetings with various staff groups, and one of the ones I remember is when I met with the faculty deans. There are 10 faculty deans, and therefore when I met with them, there were 11 people in the room. And when I looked around the room, there were 11 men. And I remarked on this, and I said, oh, no women. And people were saying, oh yeah, he's right. As if they hadn't realised before. And this was completely extraordinary to me. I thought, this is amazing. Really, this is a bit surprising. I wasn't used to having a population of deans that were all male. So then I found out a bit more about other universities in Hong Kong, and it turns out that actually this is pretty common, this pattern. And one of Sarah Aston's statistics that I carry around in my head is that in the 8 government-funded higher education institutions in Hong Kong, there are 110 posts at dean level or above. And when she surveyed them in the middle of last year, of those 110 posts, 8 were held by women, so 7%. So 53% of our student population at Hong Kong U is female, about 50% of our junior staff is female, about 60% of our admin staff is female, but 18% of our professors are female, and none of our leadership team in the academic leadership posts are female. So there's a real drop-off between student, junior staff, admin staff, and then the senior leadership positions. And that was what made me feel that joining in with he for she was a good idea. So how are we going to achieve change quickly? The other thing I've learned from the United Nations is that the United Nations itself has achieved change in gender equity. The current Director General, Wang has achieved more progress in gender equity at the United Nations than any previous Secretary General. And one of the ways in which he's done this is by insisting that all committees, all appointment committees, have at least one woman, and all shortlists for new appointments have at least one female shortlisted candidate. They sound like relatively simple initiatives, but apparently they've made a huge difference. So I'm going to say, that's all I'm going to say about Hong Kong U, but York will talk about Hong Kong more generally, and then I hope in discussion we can talk a bit more about Hong Kong U. 2 more quick comments. I said I'd say something about the Philippines. There's only one university system in the world which is female dominated at leadership level, and that's at the Philippines. And so, it's very interesting, 85% of university leadership posts in the Philippines are occupied by women. And I told you in Hong Kong it's 8%. So what's the difference? And the explanation is probably about pay, about parity of pay. Supposedly men in the Philippines won't work in universities because the jobs are poorly paid. So women are willing to work for less pay. They shouldn't have to, but they're willing to. And so women in the Philippines make progress in universities and come into leadership positions. So, and it's not an argument that that's what Hong Kong should do, by the way. I don't think we should introduce pay differences in order to encourage a change. But it's very interesting that in a system where pay parity is not present and where pay influences choice of careers, women come to dominate universities. That's very interesting. I think we can learn from it. And then finally, something about Uganda. I spent a lot of my time, I have spent a lot of time teaching and doing some clinical research in Uganda, and it's a topic I like talking about. But I would say that in Uganda, the major priorities are HIV, malaria, clean water, safe roads, antenatal care, vaccination, these kinds of things. Gender equity is probably not high on the list of your average Ugandan citizen because there are many other things to worry about. But another thing I heard in Dalian was a very interesting story about an NGO which is empowering women, actually not in Uganda but in Tanzania, which is the country next door. And the person running that charity made the point that actually economic empowerment of women is a very powerful tool. So in African villages, people who get things done are often the women. If you want to make change in an African village, you can do it via mobilizing the African women. And this charity has utilized that to try and economically empower women. So it's got women working in industries, it's got women making things and producing things and exporting them, and it's giving them economic power. And it's changing the landscape in Tanzania, which is very interesting because Tanzania and Uganda are rather similar countries, and I'd quite like to see that transferred into Uganda. So just to make the point that there are different types of empowerment, and sometimes even in developing countries, simple measures can make a huge difference. I'm going to stop there, Suganda, but I wanted to leave you with one question. I'm worried about one aspect of he for she that I don't know the facts about, and that is gender-based violence. I'm told that gender-based violence is not much of a problem in Hong Kong, and I'm interested to know whether you agree with that. I'm interested to know whether you have examples of gender-based violence. I'm interested to know whether you think it's a problem in universities in this part of the world in general. In American universities, there's a problem with gender-based violence. And in UK universities, there's a problem with gender-based violence. The UK universities are currently very concerned about something that they call the lad culture. And this involves alcohol and certain behaviours and everything else, but it also is associated with gender-based violence. And so UK universities are trying to tackle this. So this is part of one of the issues identified by he for she, and I want to know, is that an issue for us or not? Because if it is, I think we should be tackling it. I better stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Mattison. You forgot your glasses. Yeah, we'll get those to you. Could I now invite... Yes, sure. Could I now invite Dr. Yok Chow on stage to say a few words?
Can you hear me? Yes, good. Together, thank you for inviting me. And Professor Mattison, again, Dr. Chow, Mr. Mattison. I think this is a great opportunity for me to come back to the alma mater. Every time I come here, it's always a warm feeling, and particularly able to exchange views and ideas with the current students. I was here over 40 years ago, so things have changed a lot. But I've been always following what's happening in the Hong Kong University, and also very concerned about changes. So please feel free to ask me questions after this. And for those of you who do not understand or do not realize what the EOC is all about, maybe just to say a few words. Well, the Equal Opportunity Commission is established by law in 1996, where we have the discrimination law against gender. So we basically enforce 4 discrimination laws. The law against gender, the law against family status, disability, and race. We handle complaints. We try to settle as much as possible by conciliation. But at the same time, we also take legal actions and also give out legal aids and for these 4 different laws. And these laws are very important because it includes promotion of gender equality and elimination of discrimination on the basis of sex, pregnancy, marital status. And Hong Kong has been an integral part of this work for the last 20-odd years. And over the last 2 decades, much has been done to level the so-called playing field for men and women in our city. The establishment of universal education in 1970 do help us to put more girls into school alongside with boys. And before that, in the 60s and early 70s, many girls were still sent to factories to work without receiving any secondary education. And now women outnumber men in number of university students, both among undergraduates and also in taught postgraduates. And we also saw throughout the 80s and 90s more supportive legislation to provide for greater rights for women, including paid maternity leave and protection from domestic violence, in addition to passing of the sexual discrimination law in 1995. The United Nations Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, shortly we call it CEDAW, was extended to Hong Kong in 1996, and the government also set up the Women's Commission in 2001. And what about the workplace? Women now form 49% of our workforce, a significant increase from 36% in 1986. But does it really mean that there is true equality? Hong Kong has come a long way, but there's much to be done. Many women still struggle to access equal rights here in Hong Kong, including in the workplace. Pregnancy discrimination, sexual harassment continue to be the most common complaints under the Sex Discrimination Ordinance, and they make up 45% and 37% respectively of the total complaints we received in 2014. The gender pay gap has also stubbornly remained, even if we exclude the large number of female foreign domestic helpers who work here. On average, 2014, a woman earned $11,000 each month, compared with men earning $15,000. The pay gap can also be seen across different positions and educational attainment. Women with postgraduate degrees are still earning only about 71% to every dollar earned by their male peers with similar educational qualifications. And women are overrepresented among casual, part-time, or low-status full-time workers and tend to work longer hours. In 2014, women in elementary occupations work in a median of 54 hours per week, while men work 48. Women also make up the bulk of the workforce in the low-paying sectors, such as catering, caring, cashiering, and cleaning. On the other hand, on top of the scale, we saw a leaking pipeline and glass ceiling with regard to women in senior leadership positions, which can be clearly seen both in the public and also the private sector. Currently, only 1/5 of the members of the Executive Council of the government are women. The proportion of female members at the Legislative Council is also low at 16%, and particularly when viewed in comparison to other comparative jurisdictions. Although women make up almost half of the workforce, they still only make up roughly 1/3 of managers and administrators. And a recent study by the NGO Community Business showed that only 11% of board directors in Hang Seng listed companies are female, and some of them do not have a single woman at all. This certainly has impact on the company's decision-making process, and in turn, the performance given the lack of gender balance perspective. There is also a number of groups which have not been benefited as much as others in the tide of progress, often due to the intersection between their gender and other characteristics such as race, disability, age, sexual orientation, and gender identity. For instance, ethnic minority women continue to face cultural and linguistic barriers to education and services. They have a lower labor participation rate than the general population, and are more likely to be working in low-paid elementary occupations. Women with disabilities and female carers of people with disabilities are more vulnerable to violence and abuses, and very few targets and sensitive policies for their specific needs. Foreign domestic workers are among the most vulnerable groups in our society to potential mistreatment as well. These are just a few groups of women who continue to face barriers to equal opportunity in our city. What should be done? There are some key steps that can be done and should be done if we are to begin to adequately address existing gender inequality in our city. In 2015's policy address, the government announced that the appointment rate of women to government advisory and statutory bodies should be raised from 30% to 35%. This is an important step towards ensuring that women's perspectives are integrated into policy-making process. This should be applied as a concrete goal across different organizations so that to increase the number of women in senior management. Universities and institutes of higher learning should also be a part of this commitment. At the moment, I think as Mr. Madsen have said, women remain underrepresented among senior positions in tertiary institutions in Hong Kong. And there are, for example, still no female vice-chancellor in any of the institutions. Second, there should be equal pay for equal work, although by law, I think they are being protected. But at the moment, women dominate these occupations of low skill and also low pay, and are often not equally compensated, very cunningly organized by the employers. In 2014, women in elementary occupation, excluding foreign domestic helpers, earned a median of roughly 82 cents to a male-earned dollar. Such inequality is due to part of job segregation done by the employer, which often assign women to low-paying, less-value jobs, traditionally viewed as women's work. Moreover, many women have to shoulder a disproportionate burden of family care duties, which means they are under pressure to take these low-paying or part-time positions in order to allow flexibility. Employers need to ensure that differentiation of individual pay is based on reasons that are free of sex bias. Third, more must be done to address the needs of particularly vulnerable and marginalized groups of women. This includes the elderly. Remember, women actually live 6 years longer than men here. The average longevity is close to 87, and men is 81. And this includes the elderly with disability, ethnic minorities, and those who actually live alone. Many of them face specific difficulties owing to their gender and other characteristics, and may not be able to adequately access existing support measures. Further assistance is also hampered by a relatively lack of specific data about them and their needs, which should be taken into consideration in policy making. Fourth, proactive steps should be taken to counter sexual harassment, as the majority of victims are female. Professor Matheson mentioned about home violence and so on. And we find actually the majority of victims are women. And also the majority of sexual harassment complaints are also women. So indeed, I think this is something that we are concerned about. Recent surveys by the Commission show that sexual harassment remains prevalent across various sectors, and particularly in employment situations and at provision of services. In December last year, the government tightened this protection by amending the Sex Discrimination Ordinance to prohibit sexual harassment by customers against providers of goods, facilities, or services. Of course, it is considered a major step for protection of everyone in Hong Kong against sexual harassment and for fostering a safe work environment for all. It is particularly relevant for women who make up the majority of our service and sales workers, as well as complainants of sexual harassment received by us. Nonetheless, shortfalls remain. For instance, there's currently no protection for those who face sexual harassment by someone who shares a common workplace but has a different employer. Concerted action is therefore necessary to address these issues. And all of us should be on guard against sexual harassment, including in the tertiary educational sector. This is why we have organized seminars on this subject for both university staff and students. For many of these issues, our Commission has been advocating for action from various sectors and stakeholders. For there to be true progress, we must have cross-sectorial collaboration. The government and other public bodies can do more to lead this process. For instance, the government can go beyond widening the use of the gender mainstreaming checklist in all government bureaus and departments as announced in the 2015 policy address, by also encouraging its use outside of the government to include all the subvented organizations and their business partners. And this would help to spread the message of gender equality more broadly. The private sector and businesses must also take part to advance diversity and inclusion within their own company. This would also be their own benefit, given the recognizable benefits to the company's bottom line in having a gender diverse board and workforce. Such diversity promotes multiple perspectives in decision making, while also ensuring that companies can better serve the customers and clients of different backgrounds. The education sector also have a role to play in promoting inclusive values, starting from an early age. And after all, this is the true goal of education, to prepare our young people to be responsible, compassionate, and respectful citizens of a diverse and interconnected society. Already, all of you can play a key role in this by speaking out against gender stereotypes and ensuring that the campus is a safe and nurturing environment for all to learn. Everyone, whatever your gender, can role model mutual respect and understanding, and take action to ensure a more inclusive campus for all. This is one reason why Hong Kong U's initiative to be the first university globally to launch the United Nations He for She campaign on campus is both inspiring and necessary. As many of you know, He for She is the UN initiative for solidarity in the fight for gender equality, with the aim of spreading awareness and sparkling actions on the responsibility that men and boys have in eliminating discrimination and violence against women and girls. Hong Kong's commitment under this campaign include taking leadership to make gender equality a higher education priority across the sector within Hong Kong and internationally. It also highlights concrete steps to be taken on campuses and externally, and this should be applauded. The involvement of men in the fight of gender equality must be encouraged, and after all, as the saying goes, it takes two to tango. Or, in Chinese, one needs to clap with two hands. Indeed, part of leveling the playing field requires the equal participation of and investment for both men and women. In short, men need to take equal ownership of the issue. Unfortunately, many men still stubbornly feel that gender equality is only a women's issue, and that men do not need to be involved. I find the most successful organization or institutes is always related to a leader or leaders who embrace the values of inclusion and diversity and act on them with appropriate policies and decisions. In the past, I have often found myself one of the very few men in the attendance at events to promote gender equality. So I'm extremely heartened by the number of men in this attendance tonight, and congratulations to you all. And it's a sign of surely progressiveness of this university and its students. Please allow me to share some of the parting thoughts on what you can do to advance this cause. It's about my family. I grew up in a family with 3 boys and 3 girls. From a very young age, I was shown significance of providing equal opportunities for all siblings. My father, who was a BA graduate of this university in 1932, I think he's come from a very poor family. He had to receive a full sponsorship before he can actually enter university and study here. But he's a pretty good student. I think he won prizes in literature, history, geography, and drama. So when we were young, he insisted that my sisters were given equal treatment as me and my brothers, including the pursuit of education. More of importance, we were also taught to respect our mother as the supreme leader of the family. Not to laugh, because she was a village girl. She married my father when she was 15. She only finished her primary education. But my father taught her all the things that he learned, including English, and she became the teacher, the mentor, and also the role model of our family. And as I remember, they're not here anymore, but my father always, in front of us, obeyed her in every aspect, so that we'll do the same to her. And this is very important. So as a result, all 6 of us were able to finish our tertiary education and pursued a professional career of our choice. My sister, who's 1 year older than me, also entered the University of Bristol. And she's, according to her story, she's the only female dental student actually in university in those days. And even in the 60s and 70s, many female students were not able to actually pursue tertiary education, and many of them need to find a domicile role somewhere, or asked to marry somebody else. So this is something is very, very important for us to respect, that family influence is extremely important. Now, for myself, as a father of 2 daughters, I recognize how important it was that such values were instilled in me and by my family from the very start. And it's impacted both my family life and also my professional life. I have always treated my male and female colleagues equally and mindfully kept a gender-balanced team. Moreover, some of you might know that I'm involved quite heavily with people with disabilities and particularly athletes with disabilities. In 1997, and when I was elected as the first vice president of the International Paralympic Games, the committee, the IPC, I volunteered to chair the IPC's Women's Commission. They have a women's committee, And we have to go through the standard of performance of sports for women and men. And we fought very hard to increase the events for women, because at that time, women's event only accounts for less than, 20%. Of course, now they are more or less equal, or maybe 60 and 40. But there's a great, progress being made where we allow more women to participate, particularly in the international level. So this will give them impetus to train and to excel. So I think that you talk about any area that we can actually make special efforts, and these are the efforts that shows that we can do something about it. And more importantly, through their participation, they can encourage more people with disabilities from all gender, both gender, to come out and to the open, and also to participate in society in the same way as able-bodied. And this was a very much treasured experience of mine. I share these stories because I think it's necessary to emphasize why every person's action matters. Many people may feel that gender equality is such a big concern that cannot be changed by individual actions. I would argue that we have what Stephen Covey called circle of influence, circle of concern, and circle of control. We all have a circle of control which is usually very small. I think I cannot even control my family. Not to mention that I cannot control my team at work. I have to persuade them to do things. Right? But I do have a large circle of concern. We're concerned about world peace. We're concerned about the adversities in Syria. We're concerned about people dying unnecessarily. We're concerned about diseases and also violence. These are things that we're concerned about. But what about the circle of influence? It can be bigger than, certainly bigger than the circle of control. But you cannot just ignore this circle of influence if you want to change the world. You always can enlarge your network, your influence on your friends, your family, on your class, and also on your social circle. So every one of us actually have that circle, and make use of it. I think this is very important for us not to neglect that. If we feel that something is wrong in this society, we should try to change it, and change it through your circle of influence. I say that all that because I grew up over the years from a student that only cared for about myself. I was a student here. I enjoy school life very much. I enjoy having friends. I enjoy my sports, and I kept having Saturday night parties. But still, I think when you get older and you enter hospitals, when I was a medical student, I realized that you have the responsibility to look after others. And you have also the responsibility to be respectful of others. Being a medical student gave me a lot of insight about the dark side of the society, how sad people can face, not just from diseases and illnesses, but also from a lot of family disharmony, poverty, and a lot of injustice actually in the society. And I believe this is something that changed me in the few years when I was in this university. And I do think that this is also the time for many of you facing that university is different from high school. It is also different from entering the society. But this is a good transition that you can learn a lot of things, particularly on caring for others and respecting others. And only through that you can internalize those values in the years to come when you pursue your own career anywhere else. So I think I hoped I'm able to convey to you the message that university is a unique place that you can learn your values and particularly to expand your perspective of the world and try to make good use of it. So with this, I'd like to thank you for the invitation, and we're happy to answer questions. I hate monologues, so I hope that we can have some time to discuss. Okay, thank you.
Even we don't like being quiet for too long. I can see a lot of people coming up with questions. But before that, before I open the house for Q&A, I would like to invite Medhabi Arora, a final year journalism student, double majoring in journalism and global studies, to talk about her views on he for she and dispel some misconceptions that revolve around the notion of modern day feminism associated with the topic.
Thank you, Sugandha. Good evening, everyone. Good evening to our guests, Dr. Chow, Professor Madison, and Dr. Albert Chow. And also good evening to everyone present here. Before I talk about the he for she movement, I'd like to conduct a brief survey. Whoever here considers themselves a feminist, could you please raise your hand? I see about negligible male hands, but that's okay. Whoever here considers themselves a gender equalist, could you please raise your hands? Thank you. I am surprised to see that there are a number of more hands for the latter than for the former, when in fact both movements, especially in today's world, in the modern day, are actually aiming to achieve the same goal, that is equal social, political, and economic rights, irrespective of what gender you belong to. From the early 19th century up till just a few years ago, women empowerment and gender equality have been a very female domain, strictly led by women and for women. However, in recent years, that's beginning to change. Men are now standing up to call out on discrimination, inequalities, and sexual harassment faced by women and girls. Modern feminist discourse recognizes that gender inequality, through patriarchy, through gender stereotypes, through sexual violence, affect everyone, whether we're male, female, intersex, and whatever else comes in between. Even the newly developed Sustainable Development Goals have recognized that gender equality is a human right, and it needs men and women to work together to achieve. And that's exactly what the He for She campaign is trying to achieve. He for She, in its most rudimentary form, is a solidarity campaign targeted at men. It says, men are humans, not sexist chauvinist pigs who objectify women, demand sandwiches, and crack rape jokes. It's about men and boys saying, yes, I get it. I acknowledge patriarchy and male privilege where it exists. I'm willing to take a stand against gender discrimination and violence. I support you. And this solidarity works both ways. He for She serves to break down the feminazi stereotype that feminists are all man-hating, bra-burning, hairy-legged people. It's about cooperating with the opposite sex to achieve a shared goal, that is, equal social, political, economic rights, irrespective of gender. Why is this important? The feminist movement has functioned perfectly fine for decades till now, right? Why do we suddenly need the support of men? The answer is simple. Unless men in power are made to budge, the movement is worthless. Until every man is taught to respect his wife or girlfriend or the daughters and women in his life by sharing responsibilities, you haven't achieved much. It is the all-male executive boards and CEOs who are being targeted by this movement to understand the discrimination faced by their female employees, to implement change, and to destroy the gender pay gap. Some women ask, why do we need men to fight for us? The mainstream discourse is already dominated by male voices, isn't it? If men start to now lead the feminist movement, isn't that defeating the entire purpose? Now this is a stretch for what he for she is meant to be. It's about men calling out instances of gender equality, displaying their support, but not necessarily taking the lead of the movement and fighting it for women. He for she is, in its true nature, a solidarity movement. It's about men joining women to stand up for the feminist cause. There's a reason it's not called he taking the lead over she, or he establishing his supremacy over she. Another major critique of he for she is that it's an online sign-up campaign that doesn't quite reach the grassroots. For instance, a less educated poor man with no internet access has no idea that all over the world, hundreds and thousands of men have signed up to stand up against gender inequality and violence against women. He would, if he is a chauvinist or a misogynist, he would still objectify women on the streets. He would still believe that he owns his wife or girlfriend's body. There is still a long way to go before the principle of he for she truly penetrates to the grassroots. But things are starting to change. In Zimbabwe, for instance, he for she inspired a man to literally create a husband's school. He handpicked men in his community who were abusive to their partners and committed to turn them into better fathers and better husbands. In India, thanks to the policies and the ideology behind he for she, the University Grants Commission has decided to appoint gender champions in each tertiary institution to call out on discriminatory policies such as differential dress codes or differential hostel hours. To increase its concrete impact, as Professor Mattison has already mentioned, UN Women has set up a 10 by 10 by 10 impact group that calls upon 10 heads of state, 10 CEOs of global corporations, and 10 university presidents, including our own, to make concrete changes towards gender equality. So the movement has now progressed from ideology and awareness to actual concrete impact and policy. The biggest takeaway you can take from the he for she movement is to become aware and sensitized towards gender discrimination around you, be it at home, at the workplace, on the streets, or in class. This includes the experiences of sexual and gender minorities who aren't currently included within the he for she movement, but are now becoming a part of the fourth wave mainstream feminist discourse. Patriarchy, gender roles, and sexual violence affect all of us, and that's why we need to work together in solidarity to build a more just and equal world. Thank you.
Please pardon me for my technically challenged abilities of handling a PPT, but I would now like to invite Yasmin Chopra and Kanishka Seth on stage to delve into a very interesting perspective of gender division present in the education system before formal education begins. They will focus on the gender dissociations present in the education system in Hong Kong.
Thanks, Selena. Everybody. Hi, I'm Kanishka.
And I'm Yasmin.
We're both third-year art students at HKU, and we've both been born and raised in Hong Kong. I'm studying language and communications, as well as Hong Kong studies.
And I do China studies and African studies.
So, don't worry, we're not here to talk about how difficult it is to be women in a male-dominated corporate society, because that's not the aim of our talk today. But we are going to touch upon how there are endless arguments and a lot of money that's being spent to achieve gender equality, but a realistic way of doing so is just preventing it from happening at all before it gets to the stage where we need to endlessly argue about what is the best solution.
So I'm going to start off by telling you all a story about something that happened when I went out to dinner with my family. We walked into a dim sum restaurant, and I noticed the chairs of the place came in two colors, either pink or blue. So I have a younger brother, and I thought it would be really interesting to see what he had to say when I decided to sit in the blue chair, leaving the only other chair on offer, the pink one. So it was really funny because his immediate reaction was to go, Yasmin, can I sit in your chair instead? To which I go, why? And his response was something that really got me thinking, because he said, because pink is for girls. Now, my brother is a very intelligent boy, and he's no doubt the more talented sibling between the two of us. So it is really interesting to see how these society-constructed perceptions on gender have permeated into our mindset, and it really got me thinking about where this all started. I know there are debates about nature versus nurture, but as children, we start off as a blank canvas. Our views, our outlooks, and our perceptions are influenced and shaped by our environment and what we absorb through it whilst growing up. Whether it be through the media, our education, and even the toys we play with as children. What we learn will consequently follow us through the rest of our lives, impacting any future decisions or goals that we may have. Although Hong Kong is doing really well in terms of gender equality, in comparison to many other places around the world, there is still a subconscious social code and understanding of gender roles and expectations present in a lot of us. We learn our gender roles through what we are exposed to throughout our childhood. What a girl's supposed to do, how a boy's supposed to act. Why can't boys do this? Why can only girls do that? Why can't I be a plumber or an accountant? And it's notions like these which we subconsciously internalize within us. For example, think back to when you were all at school. I remember growing up and looking through my textbooks and the TV shows that I watched and understanding certain roles that I thought were expected of me because of the media that I consumed. The human mind is very incredible in this sense, to be able to process and absorb these codes and conducts from our environment and adapting them as our own. And whilst our views and understandings on gender roles can change throughout our developmental years, the expectations to conform to society's expectations, whether you be male, female, or otherwise, can remain implicit in us. So if you do a quick Google search on occupational vocabulary in children's books, there's a really interesting correlation between the types of jobs and the gender associated with it. If we take a look at this, we can see that there are only 2 women in this list of professions, and that is the nurse and the teacher. All the rest of them are men. We're not saying that successful male teachers or female technicians don't exist, but instead of limiting our subconscious, imagine if we start off living without these gender associations in mind. We can open up so many more opportunities and expand the diversity in the workforce exponentially if we break down the stigma. While Hong Kong may seem pretty neutral with education, it might not be the case. So this is not to do with gender, but to do with textbooks. This is a page from a local school textbook in Hong Kong for primary 2 students. Number 1 goes, I am British, I am an English teacher. Number 2 says, I am Filipino, I am a domestic helper in Hong Kong. Number 3 says, I am Japanese, I have a sushi restaurant in Hong Kong, and so on.
Well, sounds more or less accurate, no? I mean, every single British person or English person in Hong Kong comes to Hong Kong to teach everybody English, right? That's what we're here for. Everybody must know English. But does anybody else see the problem with this? Because we're putting people into their place. We're telling people where they cannot and where they can stand. And we're not saying, we're putting people into their place and telling them that where they stand in society, and what's worse is that we're giving this knowledge to children, and this knowledge is not 100% accurate and it does not apply to everybody. The whole purpose of education is to empower individuals to think for themselves, to think independently, but this is not what this book and this chapter about racial harmony is doing. Although education is supposed to open up our minds, this chapter suggests that we're narrowing down everybody's mind and their thoughts by putting everyone into categories. Although this isn't explicitly about gender inequality, this is about overall social inequality. And how can we teach children, we really need to sit down and critically question the values that we are teaching kids. Those kids who are too young to think for themselves or question the quality of the material that they're being taught. It is important, in order to make long-term goals in breaking down gender inequality, it is important to first take it back to the foundation, to the very beginning, to where it all started, which is our childhood. Because what we learn from this period can ultimately influence our choices and potentially even limit the capabilities and potentials that we could develop later on in life. The values and knowledge that we learn as children influence us at every stage of our lives. Oftentimes we see that there tends to even be patterns in the demographics of students who choose to take certain subjects and classes in schools. So interestingly enough, the Institute of Physics published a study called Closing Doors in 2014 where they discussed the lack of gender neutrality when it came to subject choices in schools in the senior years. Boys are less likely to take stereotypically girls' subjects, such as psychology or English, whereas girls are opting to not take physics or economics, which are stereotypically boys' subjects. This is bad news, especially for the day and the time that we are in today. We should be free to choose what we want to study, something which allows us to exercise flexibility, something that excites us. However, by the time we reach this stage in our lives, we have already internalized everything that we have picked up as children, including those stereotypes that we're being taught in our households or in schools, and even before we go to schools, just everywhere. And we've developed our own sense of right and wrong, which may not even actually be always right or wrong. So this is what we've been taught from the beginning, and this is indeed what we're going to teach our children. Another problem is that we gender things that don't need to be gendered. For example, handwriting. Now, personally, I have really bad handwriting, and I always get told off for having really bad handwriting because nobody can read it. But that doesn't say anything about my gender, can it? Well, just when you look it up online, apparently handwriting can tell you about your DNA and about your gender, because that can determine whether or not you're a girl or boy. How frequently do we look at something that is handwritten and question the writer? This looks like this is something that's been written by a girl. Or, oh look, that's something that's written by a boy. Why? Because it's messy, because it's difficult to read. Or it's written by a girl because it's cute and it's neat. But that's not always the case, is it? So, why? Why do we, if you quickly look up manly handwriting on Google, you see a bunch of squiggles and things that are difficult to read. And on the contrary, if you look up girly handwriting, you see all these bubbly, cute, block printed letters, which, and it even says cute, girly handwriting styles. What does that mean? So why do we gender these things? We don't need to gender these things. Why do we ask these questions? Oh, is it written by a boy or a girl? How does somebody's handwriting tell us anything about their gender? We don't intentionally always do these things. Like, we see something and we don't even realize that we're putting this into a category. But we do that. We end up doing this. But because subconsciously we are propagating these very stereotypes that we are trying to break down because we're so surrounded by them. And finally, if there is something that we want everybody to take away from our presentation, is that gender inequality is not only something that affects women. It can affect anyone and everyone regardless of their age, their race, and their gender. I want to share a personal story from when I was in secondary school. I did the IB diploma program in Renaissance College, Hong Kong. And in our class, for more or less, we had a pretty fair distribution of genders in all of our classes except for physics and art classes. So in physics, we had a class of about 22 people doing high-level physics, and there was one girl amongst those 22 people. Mind you, all the physics teachers in my school were males. And in art, there was, we'll talk about the physics girl first. So for physics, stereotypically physics is a boy subject, so why is she taking it? But when she's trying to reach out to break through these barriers, she's really, openly welcomed into the whole society of a male subject. She's considered a very bright and a smart student, whereas it was that one boy in a class of 40 art students, and he was considered as unintelligent or just dumb. And often he was asked if he was gay, because, oh, you're studying art, you're a boy. Why are you doing that? So he was very talented and received several scholarships based on his work, but then he still wasn't considered intellectual. And this is in the 21st century in a place like Hong Kong, where we say that gender inequality is not a problem. Obviously, it's a problem. Who knows, maybe there were more boys who wanted to study visual arts, but then they couldn't. So, now again, inequality and discrimination, it affects everybody, and but boys tend to have a harder time being accepted in society if they don't act their gender. How many times do we hear things like, oh, you hit like a girl, or stop crying, crying's for girls. So these are the very things that we need to put an end to at a very early age, so that we don't develop these things as a perspective of looking at things, and then we can teach these values further to our children and the later generations.
So what can we take from this all? We need to go back to the root of the problem and address gender inequality from its foundation. Seeds of influence are planted into us as we grow up, which we carry through with us to the rest of our lives. And if we harvest ideas of unlimited possibilities and cultivate this from a young age, we can open the doors to so many new opportunities and ideas for the betterment of our society. Believe in the power of learning through dialogue, as it's only when we bring these issues to light that we can truly come to a resolution and mutual understanding with each other. It's easy to look at equality and judge it by everyone being the same. But the truth is, we are not all the same. Humans and our personalities are conditioned to be intrinsically different, and there is so much value in working together with a diverse range of people. Before we do anything, we need to acknowledge that the problem does exist first. Gender inequality is not an issue that we should try and avoid in hopes that it will solve itself. This is why it's really great to see so many of you out here today, because from this audience alone, it's obvious that gender inequality is an issue people do care about and are willing to work together to resolve. Thank you.
Thank you, Kanishka and Yasmin. I'm sure the doctors present here today are going to have a double check on their handwriting after they go. Okay, moving on. Since we don't really have a time for a 5-minute break, could I quickly request two of my organizing committee members to set up the stage, and we will start with the open house Q&A session. Thank you. Could I request Professor Mattison and Dr. Chow to take their hot seats? We're open to questions now. Could we have the first question? Maybe you can give it to Zidane.
Hi, so I'm Serena, a fourth-year medical student currently studying at HKUSU. I'd just like to thank Dr. Chow and Professor Matheson for their very deep insight into gender inequality in the levels of academia and also the workplace. So I'd like to make a comment and kind of derive a question out of that. So knowing that He for She is a UN-based campaign, I was looking at other relevant UN bodies on gender inequality, and I found that with the phasing out of the Millennium Development Goals this year and the introduction of the Sustainable Development Goals that hopefully will be adopted later this month in the UN in New York. So I came across something called the Interagency Expert Group on Gender Statistics, and basically it was responsible for coming up with indicators for the Sustainable Development Goals. And what I found was that there are actually, out of the 170-something, there are 52 indicators for gender-related indicators, basically. And of this, I found that there was a kind of a shift of indicators from the developing world, or from low or middle income countries to higher income countries, because there were indicators that talked about the percentage or share of females in the industries of science, engineering, in law enforcement, and in the judiciary levels. And from that, I just thought that I was also reading something, it was a very damning paper that was issued by the Australasian College of Surgeons about sexual discrimination among surgeons in Australia and New Zealand. And what was found that there were 30% of female surgeons who said that they experienced some form of sexual harassment from their medical school to their career years, versus 2% among the male surgeon population. And that really got me thinking, because I haven't personally, as a medical student, I haven't really seen that much sexual discrimination in my years, but I have heard from my seniors that they do experience that. And my question would be that, is it relevant or even possible to obtain statistics on from our graduates, not only from Hong Kong U, but related academic institutions, about sexual harassment among professional degrees, not only medical degree, but other professional or higher or degrees of leadership, and whether this is actually a significant barrier for women to advance in these fields. Thank you.
So you have a surgeon and a physician. So you have
physicians
the physicians reply first. Yeah. So I have witnessed sexual harassment in the medical profession repeatedly. I've never experienced it because I'm not likely to, but I've witnessed it for sure. I've witnessed it in operating theatres and in conferences, in teaching settings. I don't know, Tina may not remember, but we went to a dinner in Ealing in West London with a colleague of mine who is female and her husband who is male, a surgeon, and he proudly told the dinner party how on his ward rounds he took it as a challenge to try and reduce all the female medical students to tears as quickly as possible. And he thought this was some kind of attribute. Actually, I should have walked out, but I didn't, shame on me, because the hostess was my colleague and my friend. But that kind of thing actually still happens. And that was not all that long ago in the UK. So that kind of thing does still happen. So there is, I think it is still there, unfortunately. And I think we heard a lot about gender stereotypes. I thought that presentation was really interesting about how to cut the problem off before it happens, sort of thing, by trying to challenge gender stereotypes. That actually is the answer. But that's going to take generations to take effect. And I'd like to also tackle the current situation, the current generations. In answer to your question, can we gather statistics? I don't see why not. There is obviously a reporting issue. And with all these kinds of statistics, reporting bias is a big problem. And I think my anecdotal experience is that, certainly in my profession, there is gender stereotype, and there is gender bias, and there is sexual harassment.
Sexual harassment is not unique for a certain sector. It cuts across everywhere. It's not related to educational level. It's not related to the level of affluence. It just happened. And I think there's certain characteristics. They also relate to the power difference of the individuals. So you always face more problems when there's a power difference between the two individuals, usually a senior or junior, a boss or an employee, and so on. And I happened to join the surgeons conference dinner last weekend, and the Australasian College surgeon president sit right next to me, and we actually talk about this. And in fact, and he has to make a very strong statement, and then a very, very strong guideline to follow to ensure that it's not going to happen. Traditionally, of course, there are more male compared with females in the surgical field. All right. In my field as an orthopedic surgeon, there's no female at all. But of course, in recent years, they have more trainees coming in and so on. And it is very important to educate people that they should look at each of the trainees according to their ability to learn and also the potential of getting into the skill level rather than just the gender alone. We still have a lot of community bias for female healthcare workers. If you go to the ward, you ask the patients, especially some of the elderly patients. So if you see a male, they think, oh, you're a doctor, and see a female, oh, you're a nurse. So I have a lot of actually friends and then also friends' children who get actually address us in different profession when they get into this profession. It's not easy to change, but I think you should educate the public about this. And I think particularly the female doctors should have the courage to confront this unequal situation. You don't need to be very angry about this. I think you should try to tell people that, no, I'm a doctor. I'm actually in charge of this work, right? When we were young, we have a ONG, obstetric gynecologist professor, who's a female. She's the world authority. She happened to be actually a very short woman as well. So whenever we did the ward round, the patient do not look at her; they look at us, because we are taller than her. We have a bigger bulk, and we are men. So it's very, very unfortunate that things happen like this. But I think very soon people understand the situation. It still takes a lot of time to change this, but it is also important, particularly now we have more medical students compared with female medical students. I think that the situation would change, I believe, and we also see more female leadership in the medical and health sector. So I think this is the time we should try to move on with this momentum. But don't get disheartened. I'm sure this will move on. But I'm talking only about Hong Kong. If you look at the rest of the world, there's still a lot of places where women are actually not given even the opportunity to study or have a career on their own. We have also encountered some of the females particularly from the South Asian countries. They were asked by the family to stop studying at the age of 14, 15, and they have to go back to their own country to find a spouse, and that sort of thing. So this is something that I think we're concerned about, because obviously with that situation they have difficulty in settling in Hong Kong and integrating in our lifestyle, and definitely I think a lot of difficulty in bringing up a family that can actually integrate with the local families as well. So we need to educate every aspect of this.
Thanks, Sikandar. I just wanted to make one comment that stereotypes are self-perpetuating. So if you have an environment where most of the people in positions of influence are male, then that may be an environment where it's okay to say or do things that are not acceptable if you're more gender balanced. And so I read something about this. There's a thing called the 30% rule. So British businesses are trying to achieve targets of 30% board representation by females. And I can't remember actually who it was I asked. I asked somebody who's an expert on this subject, what's so magical about 30%? And what she said is that 30% is the tipping point between a culture where that kind of behaviour is acceptable and it's not. Once you reach 30%, you have enough female representation to start having a culture where that kind of thing is not acceptable. And so 30%, I mean, personally I think gender balance should be 50-50. I don't understand what's magical about 30%. It should represent the population. But the answer I was given is that 30% represents the kind of tipping point where the culture starts to change.
Thank you, India. Somebody else?
Hi. Could I go? My name is Vincent. I'm a mathematician. And gender equality confuses me. And what I've been hearing today does confuse me, because I feel that gender equality is a nominalization. Everyone wants gender equality, but I'm not sure anyone knows what it is. And to address this nominalization, if you will indulge me, both the forum and Professors Matson and Chow, I would like to ask what your answer would be to two thought experiments. I believe it will be enlightening to unravel the complexity that underlies what is gender equality. So, firstly, and we'll be quick, we'll pretend that we're on a boat right now. All of us are on a boat. And it's starting to sink. And as per custom, All the women get on the boat, all the women and children, they get on the lifeboats, all the men have to stay behind. Sure, maybe this is sexist, who knows? But I'd like the women to ask themselves whether your principles are worth the 22 cents to the dollar. Would you argue for your right to be not on the boat? And I'd like to ask the men, do you feel right arguing for a spot on that boat? Because so long as the women want to argue for a spot off, you must be willing to argue for a spot on. At least that's what seems to be a reasonable definition of equality. And I'd like you to perhaps share your thoughts on that one. And secondly, it's all well and good to want 50% of all the positions of power to be occupied by women. But there is a not uncommon genetic condition that predisposes people to psychopathy, makes them far more likely to commit violent crime and do strange things like this, like I'm doing right now. It's called having a Y chromosome. And because of it, nearly all of the incarcerated population of the world are men. I'd like to ask whether your vision of a gender equal world is one where 50% of women, 50% of people in prison are women. I'd like your opinion on those two things. If you can answer those, then I would feel very happy to let the issue drop. Because at the moment, it feels we're all asking for gender equality, but I'm not quite sure. I'm very confused. I'm not quite sure what it is. So I'd like you to please shed some light on the matter.
Regarding your first scenario, remember, I think sailing has been, and particularly cruise ships and so on, has been there for years. And imagine in the 19th century or early 20th century, very few women can actually swim, all right? But all the sailors are men. And this is the reason why I think in terms of so-called emergency or contingency plan, they try to put people who cannot swim on the boats first. You go first. We men will be able to swim actually to the shore. And I think that is how it goes, all right? Of course, things have changed now. I believe actually swimming is a basic skill that everybody learned in the childhood, particularly in more developed countries. So this might be different. But still, you have to understand that in general, men are being sort of respected because of our physique. We are stronger. We have more muscle. I think we can lift things high, that's heavier. We can struggle, particularly in terms of catastrophic situation. And that's why you adopt this so-called hunter-gatherer type of concept that men should be the one who tackles any crisis, right, traditionally. But should it be the case, I'm not arguing. But of course, there are women who's courageous enough to say that, oh no, I would still want to stay on the ship. I want to tackle and fight together with them. That's fine. So we should not be too particular about that. But this policy has actually its background, and I believe it's also its reason. Okay. The second thing, it's true that we have more men in prison right now. All right. The ideal world is we should not have any person in prison. So if you feel that if women would be given more rights and more opportunity to excel, more opportunity to participate in what men are doing, they would be violent and they would be more vulnerable to commit crime. I do not agree with that. It's not a gender issue. It's all about education, also society opportunity. We try to tackle crime by prevention, by education. And of course, if women turn out to be stronger than men, so this so-called power difference is different. I think there would be the reverse type of harassment in our society, and that would be changed. But I do not see this can be changed genetically and also by by just evolution. So I do not believe that is a relevant issue at all. Okay.
I thought they were great questions and very thought-provoking. The sinking boat needs enough life rafts for everybody to get on, irrespective of gender, and then there wouldn't be a problem. And if everybody, I guess everybody in the lecture theatre has probably watched Titanic. And on Titanic, it wasn't only gender; it was wealth that determined whether or not you got into a lifeboat. So there's all sorts of inequities, and I think there's legislation to ensure that there are enough lifeboats. So it shouldn't be an issue in the future. I hadn't thought of whether you can swim or not answer. That's a very interesting answer. On the prison population, I think I'd say two things about that. One thing, I think there are some differences between genders that we should celebrate and not try and stop. And I think if less women commit criminal offences and the judicial system locks them up in prison, then that's something to be celebrated. And men could learn from women something about that. I don't aspire to have equal populations of men and women in prison because I think that's determined by the judicial system and who commits the crimes. So I agree with you. That's not actually a gender issue. It's actually it's a social issue about who's doing something that should deprive them of their freedom. But I do think that it's one of the examples where actually women can teach men something. And sorry, I interrupted my own round of applause. You started your comments by saying it's very difficult to define. Gender equity to me is extremely easy to define, as is racial equity and disability equity and everything else. The sooner we reach a situation where someone's prospects of either getting a job or being paid a certain amount of money or getting into a particular organisation is not determined by their gender, the colour of their skin, or any other aspect of their personal characteristics, then we will have arrived in equity. And so for gender equity, in my opinion, it should be calculated according to the population. The population of the world is slightly larger female than male, and so therefore any equation where that's not represented in equality of opportunity, then there is inequity. And until something's done about that, you will still, if you had a gender equal world, you'll still have some professions where there are more women than men, and you'll have some professions where there are more men than women. That's fine. That's diversity, and we should celebrate it. But it's the opportunities that need to be equally available, irrespective of gender or race.
That's okay. So I'm a LLB year 4 student, and my question is also related to law. I think an issue which has not been raised today is the topic of the rights of transgender and homosexuals. So, but I think it's also quite important in that regard. So I think in the W versus registration of marriage case, Miss W was born as a man, was denied the right to marry her long-time boyfriend just because of the fact that she's biologically a man. And I was just, and the judge in that case said that the Hong Kong society is not ready yet for such a big change. And I personally find that this was kind of a failure to actually act, because as we can see in the US, that the common law system is actually a good system to kind of use the law as an instrument to change society, and kind of to further the society, as we can say in the, I think the US was the Obergefällten case or something, where the Supreme Court decided that marriage of homosexuals should be made legal, should be constitutional. But I think in Hong Kong that was not made. So I just wanted to ask you, what is your opinion? Should the law, in this case, be used as an instrument? So it could be said like, should the act or should the change come first? Should the law change first or should the society change first?
I think I'll answer this question. I believe that because we are heavily involved with this case, particularly as an institution that like to advocate for equality. And if you understand the nature of transgender person, we feel that gender dysphoria is considered a form of disability. So we cannot actually discriminate against people with transgender. Okay. The other thing that is more important, particularly in this case, is the Court of Final Appeal has made a very strong recommendation, and actually this is binding, that the government need to review the law. And the government did the minimum last year, just trying to amend the marriage law, but unfortunately, it did not actually get passed by the Legislative Council because it was not associated with the other request by the Court of Final Appeal, which is they need to also have a gender identity ordinance. I think that's following similar to what the UK has. So I think this issue is going to be brought up again very soon. And I agree that this is because the Court of Final Appeal have a ruling, and the government has a commitment to do. So eventually, I think this will be a legal issue. Definitely, I think, and I hope that this law is going to protect them in regard to not just the right to marry, but also to the right to decide on their own gender identity. I think this is a very important issue.
We'll just take a couple of questions more.
Hello, my name is Maria. Thank you very much for your talk. It was very interesting. I just wanted to ask a fairly simple question. You talked about issues in the considering the lad culture in the UK. So I was wondering, how do you think the issues of sexism and sexual harassment should be treated within the societies that are male-dominated, such as sport team, for example?
It's a huge topic. I used to play rugby at school, and before you go out and try and take on in a very physical contest the other team, you sort of psych yourself up and you try and put up with injuries and you try and keep going and all this kind of thing. And that's you could say that's actually a lad culture. I know women play rugby as well, but many more men play rugby than women. And so lad culture in that context maybe is not all bad. And on the sporting field, there are some aspects of performance which are gender related. And so I think you can't say that everything that reinforces that is a bad thing or for sporting achievement. So I think it's a tricky topic. Lad culture, in the context I used it, has been described as the problem in the UK youth currently, and expressed to some extent in UK universities. And it's it's sexual harassment. It's actually behaviours that are unacceptable based on people's gender. And I think it does need to be eradicated for that reason. But I think when you start bringing it into male-dominated sport, I think it becomes very grey. And I think there's some areas where actually it's probably okay, and there's other areas where it's not. But the fundamental principles, and I didn't comment on the transgender question because York's got much more expertise in that than me. But to me, the principles are very similar as well. There shouldn't be discrimination against anybody on the grounds of sexual orientation, gender assignment, race, disability, or anything else in an ideal world. And I think lad culture is discriminatory, and therefore, as a general rule, I would vote against it. But I can see there are some sporting environments where maybe it's more acceptable.
Thanks. I just wanted to ask a further question on sexual harassment. I heard rumors and some news from friends that they got harassed on campus and even in halls, but they wouldn't tell me further about the real things. It's very simple because they feel ashamed to tell things out. And so because of that, I cannot say which hall or which person. But I really want to ask that, for example, has the EOC conducted any workshops or given any consultants to those people that suffered from the sexual harassment and then successfully help them to stand up and say something out and fight against injustice? Because I know it's really hard for the victims to really say something, but as their friends or just other person just want to help, but you can't force people to tell the truth. So I want to ask how we can help them. Thanks.
sexual harassment is an important aspect of our work, actually. 30 to 35% of our work, particularly related to the sex discrimination ordinance, is actually campaigns regarding sexual harassment. It happens everywhere. We are very concerned about some of the activities being done by the orientation camps in universities, in tertiary institutions in the last few years. So we start to have a workshop for the university, what they call the student associations and representatives, starting from last year. In 2014, we invite all the people to come. There's only about 12, 13 people. This year, we organize a workshop for them, I think sometime in June or May, I think right after the examination, I think. And because the time that they can afford to come. And we have more than 50. So I think the awareness actually has increased, and it represents all the tertiary institutions in Hong Kong. So so far we have not heard of anything that's reported to us, and we have not received any complaint as such. But it does not mean that it might not have happened. All right. The very common thing about sexual harassment campaign is the victim is always afraid to speak up, because if after speaking up he might lose his or her circle, particularly if you stay in a hall and you've been harassed by somebody who's senior or somebody with a higher position, and sometimes they will feel that, okay, if that's the case, I will lose my opportunity to stay there, and everybody will start to look at me as somebody very special. They might ignore me or try to neglect me in their social circle and so on. So this is very important. What we like to drive at is every institution, including universities, need to have a mechanism of addressing that. So I think the University of Hong Kong actually have an equal opportunity officer and a team. So if you go to them and tell them the story and so on, they may be able to do something within the environment, so that that can be resolved, and she need not actually hide everything herself. To have some grievances within oneself can be harmful sometimes. You need to share with somebody. So I hope that you can bring the message back to your friend about this opportunity to voice, and I'm sure the university can deal with it. If they cannot deal with it, they can come to us. All right? But we usually like to have the problem solved at the place where it started. So it would be much easier to have a good settlement.
If I just add the university, I completely condemn sexual harassment. It's unacceptable, and if cases of sexual harassment come to my attention or my colleagues' attention, we'll do everything we can to investigate them and act accordingly against the perpetrator. There's a very clear definition of what constitutes sexual harassment, and we have those guidelines. We have a procedure for dealing with sexual harassment, but we do need it to be reported. I was aware of a recent case, I don't know if it's the same case that you've heard of. There was an allegation of sexual harassment within the university recently, where it was reported not by the victim, but by a friend of the victim. And we made a discreet but determined effort to try and get the victim to come forward, offering various protections that we were able to offer against disclosure of identity and all the rest of it. But unfortunately, in that case, that didn't achieve a report. We have to have a report, and we have to have names of perpetrators and evidence so that we can investigate it, unfortunately. And that does require people to come forward. And actually, this applies to all crime, but obviously, sexual crimes or sexual harassment have a level of sensitivity and a level of potential embarrassment, and that makes reporting much more difficult. So we are aware of it, we do have procedures, but unfortunately we can't act if we don't have facts.
I remind you, this is the last question.
views on this, especially because I teach on Sarah Easton's Common Core course, and it's always very interesting to see what students believe and what they feel when they arrive on that course. Do you think that there is space within the university for some sort of mandatory or sensitivity sort of training when we welcome students into this community? Because some of the views that have been expressed by students when we polled them anonymously have been very surprising, views that I did not expect students to hold. And as a sort of follow-up question just on what's been asked, do you think there's possibly space for a reporting system which does not require things to go further? Coming back to the first question, almost like an exit survey of students saying, was sexual harassment part of your experience at the university? I'm just mindful that you said earlier on that you don't know whether it happens, and a large part of that could be it not being reported. But even if there's no direct action against perpetrators, it could help to inform university policy making. I just want to get your thoughts on that.
Thanks. So the quick answer to both your questions is yes. There is a place, indeed, there is a plan for gender awareness or gender equity awareness education for both staff and students, because I think that's one approach. It's actually one approach that UN Women advocate, and one of the things they want to see, and it's one of the things that we've said that we will deliver. So yes, absolutely yes, there is a place for awareness training and gender equity training. The thing I particularly asked, I don't know whether it exists or not, is not so much sexual harassment. I'm absolutely certain sexual harassment exists, because it exists in every part of society. And I think it would be extraordinary if it didn't exist in Hong Kong U, but I'd still like to know about it. I'd like to know how prevalent it is. The thing I'm worried about is gender-based violence, which is not necessarily the same thing, but that is thought. I mean, Hong Kong is generally regarded as a safe society where levels of violent crime are relatively low. That doesn't mean they're non-existent, but they're relatively low. And I'd like to know whether that's true at the university or not. I have the impression that it probably is. A reporting system along the lines that you suggested, some kind of sort of exit survey, I think is a very good idea. And I think we do have mechanisms whereby we can collect that kind of information. You know, we assess the student experience both during the course and at the end of it. And a question on sexual harassment or their experience of gender equity issues, I think, could be incorporated. So I think it's a good idea.
I have a question on microaggression, which is something perhaps not so prevalent in Hong Kong, but more so in the States. Like, for example, people who started to embrace equality regardless of like gender or racial, they start to have a very sort of overreaction or excessive protection to those people who are currently under that sort of inequality. Like if, for example, a boy likes pink and somebody like makes a joke out of it like for fun, then people are starting to think like, okay, that boy is abused and we have to protect that boy, and that boy would eventually become a social media phenomenon where people just start to like, why are you harassing that boy? Like he likes pink, that's what he does. And do you think it's something that's going to happen in Hong Kong, and if we can actually do something to prevent that? Because that somehow is what gave people the idea of that feminism is something that degrades men in the first place.
I'll have a go at answering. It's a difficult question. I don't know anything about microaggression. I think what you're referring to is sort of some of the downsides of achieving equity. And I suppose my initial answer is it would be, I'd like to get to that point where we've got equity before I start worrying about the downsides. But that's, you know, as a sort of a general comment, I think we've got a lot of progress to make where there may be some consequences and there may be some unforeseen risks. But I actually think we know that there is gender inequity and we have to tackle it. So I'd be prepared to tolerate some downsides in order to get to the equity is my sort of general answer. But Emma Watson, who is the champion of He for She, on the He for She website there's a YouTube clip, or there's a link to a YouTube clip, and if anyone hasn't watched it, I'd recommend you watched it. And she addresses some of those kinds of questions about gender stereotypes and gender biases affecting men and women, and sometimes being unpredictable. And I think she knows more about it than I do.
It is very difficult to sort of define what is overreaction. If somebody says something wrong, inappropriate, or have a behavior that is not considered actually appropriate for that occasion, I think he should be criticized. I think simple as that. But I can see that now in the social media is always overplay all this. And if somebody make a comment, there will be 100 other people make a comment. And people will be targeted, particularly I think with names. And surrounded by a lot of anonymous attacks. I think this is not considered a fair way of addressing the issue. But unfortunately, this is what the media actually allowed. I think this is something that we really concerned about. Harassment in social media is very difficult to control. I think one of the best ways is try not to open up yourself too wide and not to be too transparent about yourself. Because very often you get abused because of that situation. But I think in general, I think we still would have to rely on education and particularly how to respect each other. Many of us come from different backgrounds, we have different educational level, we see things very differently. So making just one comment might not be intentional. So it is very important to know whether the motive behind what is being said is actually is there. Sometimes if it's unintentional, I think just a simple apology would be able to work. But if not, of course, I think we should, I think the perpetrator need to be punished. I think this is something that we strongly feel that if anybody feels they agree on that aspect, they can always come to us and be able to explain to him or her what can be done.
Just on a quick fact-checking basis, to the mathematician, the XY chromosome, that study has actually been disproven several times. So the Y chromosome actually has been linked to obesity or criminality.
All right, I think that conclusion can go on indefinitely. But since we're running over time, I'm going to quickly wrap up the forum. And it cannot conclude without giving a paean to those who have prioritized organizing today's event over their other commitments. I would like to thank Dr. Wang Chi-Chan, Assistant Director of the General Education Unit, Mr. Baker Ho from the General Education Unit, and HKU Student Consulting Group for co-organizing it. I would like to thank the organizing committee of the forum for making it a third successful event. But now could I invite Dr. Albert Chow, Dean of Student Affairs, to come on stage and first address the House and then give a token to our guests.
Dr. Chow, Professor Matheson. Well, actually, I'm also associated with the General Education Unit, working with Chi-Chong and Rebecca. So as a co-organizer, I would like to thank the two speakers for your wonderful and inspiring sharing. Every time I listen to Dr. Yok Chow and Professor Matheson on this particular topic, it would give me a lot of thoughts, not only about the issues themselves, but there are indeed a lot of things that we need to do in the university to promote gender equality amongst other matters related to equal opportunity. On this, I want to thank Dr. Chow particularly because we have benefited a lot from the expertise and support from your office, from your commission, in terms of staff development, in terms of support for students with, say, special educational needs or gender issues like these. Tonight, I think the three students who did sharing indeed gave a lot of thought-provoking comments. Particularly you mentioned about the Sustainable Development Goals. I took time to study them. Indeed, they are very challenging. There are 17 goals with 169 targets, and they are meant to replace the Millennium Development Goals by the end of this year. group of colleagues have been talking about how to take this goals forward in the university. Gender equality is just one of the 17 goals. So we have a lot to do there about the goals about poverty, even biodiversity, environmental protection, and all that. So we are thinking about that. And then the fill in blank page bothered me. Okay, I was mumbling to the president. I'm a psychologist, one of the minorities in the psychology field, being a male psychologist. But that reminds me of the free word association test that we study about even in introductory textbook. And that revealed a lot of unconscious bias, unconscious thoughts that the two speakers have talked about, unconscious gender bias or stereotype. I think that is something that we need to fight against. Well, to our partners this time, okay, the Hong Kong Youth Student Consulting Group. This is our third Global Student Forum that we jointly organize. I am very grateful for the partnership. I'm very grateful to all the participants here. Just today, the president led a team of 10 colleagues from the University of Hong Kong to meet a quality audit panel from the UGC. The panel will make a lot of very important comments which have far-reaching implications for our future. And then one of the issues was indeed internationalization. They asked us how we promote this kind of discussion on global issues, global topics. It is about a mindset, not just about numbers of students and staff who come from outside Hong Kong. Well, if they had a chance to stay behind for a few more hours and attend this forum, I think we don't have to do a lot of persuasion today. I totally enjoyed this discussion, and I hope that we can work together. Or I would encourage the Hong Kong Youth Student Consulting Group and other students sitting in this room to organize your own forums and talks. We will be very happy to provide the logistics and everything, and then you run your own show and then make this campus a very, very stimulating and intellectually diverse campus. This is my own wish. So with that, may I thank everybody, particularly the two speakers, the students who ask questions, who share, and our partner team. So we would like to, as a token of appreciation, I would like to present two small gifts to you. And that is also one of the messages that we want to send. We want to promote sustainable living and without completely erase the use of disposable eating utensils. Okay.
Lastly, I would like to thank you all for attending the forum and making it a third successful one. If any of you are interested in joining us in organizing the next forum, you can either contact me or email us on our Facebook page. The forum has now concluded. Please return the handouts after filling out the feedback form. The organizing committee is standing at the gate. But could I please request Dr. Albert Chow, Professor Mattison, Dr. York Chow, Dr. Christina Mattison, and Ms. Palin to please come on stage and have a photo with the organizing committee. Yes, we would. Sure, that would be a great option. Could everybody just be seated where they are? I think this was the better option for you. Could everybody flex their muscles a bit and move forward? It would be great to be included in the picture. Thank you. Could we do this quickly too?